Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation on the socio-cultural framework to examine social support process among teachers in online settings. First and foremost, before we start the ball rolling, I would like to thank Dr. Charles, the convener of Eurasia Research, for giving me this opportunity to deliver a keynote address at the 20th International Conference on Teaching, Education and Learning, ICTEL 2020. It is unfortunate that due to COVID-19 pandemic, we cannot meet each other face-to-face in London this year. But thanks to the advancements of technology that we are now here in this conference meeting each other online. In this session, I'm going to share something that I'm passionate about, which is the social support process among teachers on networking sites. I'm going to focus on the socio-cultural framework, which can be used for a comprehensive analysis of the co-construction of social support which takes place on the networking site. This is the socio-cultural framework which I will explain in this session. The COP stands for Community of Practice, AS is Affinity Space, and DC is Discourse Community. I designed this framework based on meticulous scrutiny of existing theories and theoretical concepts. I tested this framework in a big research project which focused on social support process among teachers on Facebook. I refined and expanded this framework based on the findings of that research. And now I'm ready to engage in intellectual discussion with all of you. My research, which involved the use of the socio-cultural framework, has produced meaningful findings, which I documented in book and journal publications. This includes a book with Routledge published in 2018 entitled Supportive Conversations on Facebook Timelines, Discourse Topic Management, and also an article in Discourse Studies Journal entitled Topic Continuation Strategies Employed by Teachers in Managing Supportive Conversations on Facebook Timeline. The key argument underpinning this framework is that social support should be conceptualized as a process instead of a particular thing, which means social support is not a thing that you simply can take and receive from somebody or give back to them. Instead, it is a process which you co-construct together, a process which requires you to work together with those people to finally have an output, which is the support needed. Now, you should have an idea in mind that this framework requires you to examine the discursive behavior of the interlocutors involved. This sociocultural framework synthesizes three theoretical concepts to become a comprehensive analytics lens. These are community of practice, COP, affinity space, and also the discourse community. The community of practice, COP, emphasizes membership and sense of belonging, which influences the pattern of participation in the community. Affinity space focuses on the interaction in a space that people can enter or leave and participate freely without having to have membership and create sense of belonging. Discourse community emphasizes the preferred discursive practices of the community members, and it views discursive identity construction as a means of fitting into that community. Taken together, these three theories, community of practice, affinity space, and discourse community, offer a comprehensive framework for exploring the co-construction of social support, beginning from the discursive construction of desired identities to fit in the online community or enter online space. The discursive practices employed in the co-construction of social support, and also to the impacts of support on teacher development in line with the COP's view of identity as becoming. So basically, this is the gist, the overview of this socio-cultural framework. Let me now explain further about the conceptualization of social support as a co-constructed activity, so that we can have adequate understanding of this concept to operationalize the socio-cultural framework in our research. Remember, if you conceptualize social support as a particular thing, that is something given, done, or said, that one person can offer to another, or an individual state such as perception, expectation, a character trait, this conceptualization is not useful in understanding the role of social support in the complex process of building relationship. So, up to this point of my presentation, I have argued that social support should be conceptualized as a co-constructing activity, which is the key argument in forming this socio-cultural framework that I'm talking about now. So, what is co-construction? The co-construction is defined as the joint creation of a form, interpretation, stance, action, activity, identity, institution, skills, ideology, emotion, or other culturally meaningful reality, covering a range of interactional process, including collaboration, cooperation, and coordination. I adopt the definition by Jacobi and Och, 1995. The attention should be given to the phrase the joint creation in this definition by Jacobi and Och. So, by conceptualizing social support as a co-constructing activity, we actually conceptualize it as a social phenomenon. This is in line with Taylor et al. 1998, who state that we prefer to think of social support as a dynamic social activity. Social support is achieved through the back and forth actions, talk and gestures of people working together to create satisfying social relations. This way, thinking of supporting as a process instead of a commodity frames it as a shared meaning created and negotiated through social interaction. This means that a person doesn't simply give or receive social support, but instead collaborates actively with another to create a shared understanding with that person about one's concern around a particular experience. For example, that the experience is tough, threatening, sad, challenging, and what may be needed to cope with that experience. For example, physical, financial assistance, encouragement, and esteem boosting. So, theorizing social support as an interpersonal process offers a valuable framework for a close empirical analysis of the discursive practices of individuals engaged in that social support. By focusing on these discursive practices, how individuals negotiate meaning to create shared understandings can be unpacked to provide insights into the process of social support. Right, I think now we are done with the foundation of the socio-cultural framework, that social support is an interpersonal process. Now we will move on to the three main elements that make up this framework in serving its function as an analytic lens: the community of practice, the affinity space, and discourse community. Alright, let's begin with community of practice. Community of practice, COP, is a concept developed by Leif and Wenger, 1991, who emphasized that learning does not take place solely in the learner's mind, but in the social processes of a community. In brief, COP proposed a pattern of participation that newcomers can understand the broader context and specific events in a community by directly observing the practices of experts. By contrast, those who are separated from experts have limited access to their tools and community, and therefore have limited growth. Learning from the COP perspective is the production of identity, according to Wenger, 2010. Wenger claims that learning is not just acquiring skills and information, it is becoming a certain person, a knower, in a context where what it means to know is negotiated with respect to the regime of competence of a community. Conceptualizing identity as becoming is useful for understanding the teacher's development as they interact with each other online. However, in this framework, I argue that it is less useful for understanding the discursive identity constructed by the teachers to gain acceptance by that community, which can be better explained through the concept of discourse community, which is the third element of the socio-cultural framework. So, this discourse community is needed in this framework to complement the COP. But now let's look at the second element of the socio-cultural framework, which is the affinity space. This affinity space is a concept developed by G 2005 based on Leaf and Wenger's COP. But while Leaf and Wenger emphasized membership and belongingness amongst individuals in the community, G in this concept focuses on the idea of a space in which people interact. Like COP, individuals in an affinity space, they relate to each other through common interests, endeavors, goals, or practices. However, in contrast to COP, which only consists of newcomers and old-timers, an affinity space is conceptualized to be shared by newbies, masters, and everyone else. And based on their own choices, purposes, and identities, each individual in an affinity space benefits in their own way from their participation, and they can mingle with others as they wish, learning from them when and where they choose. In this sense, learning in an affinity space can take place in a more flexible way compared to learning in COP, which only occurs through what Wenger calls as legitimate peripheral participation, LPPP. Flexible learning in affinity space is especially relevant to social media like Facebook, as timelines can be accessed by friends regardless of their identities, whether they are newbies or masters to Facebook, the time of the day, and they are free to post on the timelines or to engage in lurking, reading other users' status updates and comments without indicating their presence. So, the concept of affinity space and COP complement each other, and this contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of an online phenomenon. For example, Pelican and Ann 2014, who examined the structure of social interactions in a forum thread about the game Minecraft, they found that the participations in that forum operated according to G's concept of an affinity space, but there was often an assumed community identity lying beneath the interactions of players in that space. So, in other words, online interactions have been shown to have the characteristics which are best examined through COP and affinity space perspective. One is not enough. Right, now let's move to the last element of the sociocultural framework. It is necessary to bring in Swale's 1990 discourse community theory in addition to G's 2005 affinity space and Leaf and Wenger's 1991 COP, because affinity space and COP seem to have overlooked the role of discursive identity construction so that individuals can fit into the community or initiate their entrance into the space. Alright, so now let's look at discourse community. A discourse community is a group of communicators who share common goals or interests and adopt certain preferred discursive practices in public discussion. Some characteristics of a discourse community overlap with Wenger's 1998. However, when analyzing a discourse community, the units of observation are the common discursive practices, whilst for COP, they are the common social practices of the community. Hence, in order to fully understand the phenomenon being studied in my research, teachers interacting with friends on Facebook timelines, these two theoretical perspectives and G's affinity space were applied so that both the discursive and social practices employed by teachers for accomplishing their shared goals can be examined. Alright, so I have talked about the foundation of this framework and also the three elements in it. Now I'm going to summarize and synthesize the relation between all of them. As illustrated in figure 1, we can represent the co-construction of social support as taking place in a COP, discourse community or affinity space. Despite the different emphasis on defining characteristics, COP, discourse community and affinity space share a common ground in that they all focus on individuals' interpersonal engagement, which is the crucial element in the co-construction of social support. The desired identity that is discursively constructed is the main feature of discourse community. Self-development reflected in the notion of becoming is key to COP, and social support can be attributed to an affinity space which encourages flexible ways of beneficial participation in the space. As the model shows, I argue that the construction of the desired identity, the co-construction of social support, and self-development are all continuous processes supported by the discourse. Individuals who wish to engage in the co-construction of social support use discourse to construct their desired identities so that they can join the community or enter the space and mingle with other individuals in there. As they achieve this, they can engage in discursive construction of social support, which contributes to their self-development. So, in conclusion, what I'm arguing is that for a comprehensive examination of the social support process, these three elements, the discursive construction of desired identities to fit into the community or to gain access to the community space, the discursive practices in the co-construction of social support, and the impact of social support on self-development need to be scrutinized across COP, discourse community and affinity space. Thank you for listening and hope to see you again in the future. Thank you and bye.